In order to do Angular, you're going to need to use TypeScript, which is a small superset of JavaScript. If you already know JavaScript, you know most of TypeScript, but TypeScript just adds a little bit of extra fluff, let's say, to JavaScript. Most people agree that TypeScript actually adds very valuable things and that it's a good idea to use it, especially on larger projects, and a lot of people like it. Some people don't. But in order to do Angular, you do have to use TypeScript. So in this section, we're going to cover just the basics of TypeScript, the core of it, which is types. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up StackBlitz, which is an awesome online editor if you haven't seen it before. And we're going to scroll down here. We're going to create a new blank TypeScript project just to give us a little place to play around with. I'm going to close that over here. We've got our preview over on the right, but that's really not going to matter. So we're going to close that as well and just have our code window. And we're going to talk about code here. Now, when we're writing JavaScript, if we want to declare a variable, we use the let statement. And we can create a variable such as myvar. And we can take that variable and we can assign it to any value we want. We can assign it to, say, the value 3. We can assign the string Joe to it. We can assign the value true to that variable. And that's how JavaScript works. Now, it turns out when you're writing typical code, though, usually when you create a variable, that variable has a purpose. And that's good coding, is to give each variable a purpose. And the purpose of the variable usually means that the type of data that goes into that variable is going to be of a certain type. For example, if we renamed this variable from myvar to, say, age. Now, line 9, where we assign the value 3 to age, is just fine, but assigning the name Joe to the variable age just doesn't make much sense. Neither does assigning the value true. And that's the purpose of TypeScript's types, is for us to explicitly say that we want a certain variable to contain data of a certain type. So we do this by using the colon syntax, and then the type comes after that. So if I want to make age restricted to just the number type, I do this. And now notice what has just happened. Age on line 10 and 11 have little red squiggly lines underneath them. And if we hover over those, we'll get an error message that says, hey, that string is not assignable to type number, and that boolean is not assignable to type number. So we can, through TypeScript, encode a specific type. And that makes sense in the context of actual code versus just demo code, where we create a dumb variable like myvar that can contain any value. There are some other basic types that are built into TypeScript. For example, if we create a variable name, then obviously that should be a string. And so now we can assign name the value of Joe, but we cannot assign name the value of 4 because we've restricted it to type string. We can also use the boolean type. For example, if you want to keep track of whether or not somebody is an adult, and give it type boolean. And now we can set adult equal to true, but we can't set adult equal to the value 3. That's going to give us a TypeScript error as well. Now, sometimes we do want to create some kind of a placeholder variable that can contain multiple types, if not any type. For example, maybe there's another function that might return one of a various number of types or values, maybe like our result from some kind of a call. And so in that case, we want to tell TypeScript, be more relaxed, let it really be any value. And we use, in that case, the any type. That's what the any type is for in TypeScript. So now we can set result equal to 3, and we can reset result equal to true, and we can set it equal to a string. It really doesn't matter. It could be any type. There are more complex types than just these plain Boolean types. For example, there is the object type. And we can say, hey, the person must be an object. And now we can assign person the value of an object. And if we want to, we could then try to give that person, say, a name. And that works out just fine. But what if we want to, say, set that person's age value by just assigning it a new age property equal to the value 5? Well, now we're getting another error from TypeScript. TypeScript is saying, hey, age doesn't already exist on that type. So where we created it here, it was okay, but now it's complaining because that age property doesn't exist already on the type. With objects, we can actually be more complex, and we can tell TypeScript, hey, here's the shape of this object. Here are the properties that should exist on this object. So a person might have a name, which is a string, and it might have an age, which is a number. And now we're getting an error on line 23. It's saying, when you created this person, you didn't give them an age, and they are supposed to have an age. And so we can go in and say age 5. And now on the next line, when we set it equal to a new value, say 6, it's okay. In fact, one of the benefits here is that if we type in person and hit the period, we get IntelliSense because of the editor that we're using. StackBlitz is actually using VS Code underneath the hood, and VS Code supports TypeScript inspection, and it inspects and looks and says, hey, the person type has an age and a name property. So if you do person dot, we know that it's got to be one of those, and it prompts us for that. So we can now set name equal to Bob. Another important part of TypeScript is the fact that we can give parameters types. So let's say that we have a new function, and we call this function createPerson, and that takes in an age and a name. And we return out an object with that given age and that given name. Well, we can actually restrict this and say, hey, you have to pass in a number. If we don't do that, then when we call createPerson, we can pass in the wrong things. We might pass in Joe, 35, because we forgot the order of the parameters and which one was which. But we can restrict this number there and string here by using the same syntax, the colon, and then the data type. And now we're getting an error. Hey, Joe is an assignable to type number. So then we could put that to 35, and it gives us an error on the other parameter. We put it back to the string value Joe. And again, the nice thing here is when we capture this, now TypeScript knows what that type is of that variable Joe. And if I type in Joe dot, then I get the IntelliSense that tells me, oh, you've got an age property and a name property. Now there's a related part to this when we're creating objects, and that is classes. So we can create a person class, and we can give that person class an age and a name, but we can give those properties types. Number, string, and now if we create a new person, then we get the same IntelliSense. And this is closely reflected to how we created those objects with a specific string, like this person object that we created on line 22. The final piece of typing syntax that I want to cover is when using arrays. For example, if we want to have an array of ages, we might say let ages, and we want to define this as an array, but looking at the name, it's pretty obvious that that array should only include numbers. So we can say this is going to be an array, but we can give that array a type. We just put that type right before the array, and that tells TypeScript that this array can only contain numbers. So let's set it equal to a new array, and then we can do ages.push, and we can push in the value 25. But if we try to push in something that isn't a number, then we're going to get a TypeScript error. Now, it is a little bit more common with arrays that you want to contain a variable list of types, in which case we can use the anyType there in order to contain any type. And that's the basics of types in TypeScript. To sum up, the really important thing to understand is that if you want to restrict the type of a variable to a specific type, after that variable is declared, you give a colon and then the type, such as here on line 34, where we restrict age to a number. And this could be done pretty much anywhere where we declare some kind of an identifier, such as a variable, the property of a class, or the parameter of a function.